Good evening, guys. Okay, so we're going to continue down this path on our herbal terms so we can understand the plants better when we talk about them later. So, have you ever heard the term blood cleanser? So if you spent any time reading any old books, inherited any, lucky dogs, you will see the term used time and time again: blood purifier, blood cleanser, blood cleaner. And when you first start digging in, especially now that the terminology has changed, it can be a little confusing, right? Because modern medicine tells you that your liver cleans your blood and your kidneys filter your blood, right? So you're reading these herbs and you're like, blood purifier, blood cleaner, like how does it affect my liver and kidneys? So were the herbalists wrong back then when they labeled them that way in the books? Were they confused? Highly doubt it. Or were they just simply observing situations and labeling what they saw? So we're going to dig in a little more. So one of the things I learned first, right, when I first started to study herbalism, was that you've got to learn these words and understand them so you can see how the plants are interlinked. And sometimes old herbal terms don't translate very well into modern language. So the new word, the one that is more appropriately used now, is alternative. And so honestly, that can be a little confusing too, right? Especially when you're reading the medical books and your eyes are starting to cross. But before you look up the definition, right, I can tell you it's usually very vague, right? You'll see phrases like restores health, improves function, purifies your blood. And those all sound really nice. We all need that for sure. But what do they actually mean by that? And so that's where we always need that little extra help. So to understand alternatives, you have to remember most herbalists throughout history didn't have laboratories, right? I mean, all of this new science is very new. They couldn't take blood panels. They couldn't run CTs on you. They didn't know about hormone fluctuation. They didn't know about inflammatory markers and inflammatory diseases. They didn't know really and understand the lymphatic system on a lot of stuff if you go really far back. So all they did was they observed plants and then they looked for patterns. So imagine you're an herbalist. I always like to use our imagination. So imagine you're an herbalist a couple hundred years ago and you give someone an herb, right? They come to you with a complaint and you give them an herb, and a month later their skin looks better and their digestion's improved and their energy levels are just out the roof and they just simply seem healthier all around. And you don't know why, because you can't run any tests. You only know what you're seeing with your eyes, right? And so over time, herbalists began grouping certain herbs together because they seem to create gradual improvements of humans' overall wellness. And some herbs can be used on animals too. But that group became known as the alternatives, right? So it kind of changed from blood cleansers and stuff over to alternatives. And the easiest way for me to think about an alternative, right, because I have to dumb it down to myself too, I have a lot in my brain sometimes as well, is they're not dramatic herbs. And so they're not the herbs you're going to reach for because you want something to happen in the next 30 minutes, right? So they're not like a pain pill, right, you can just grab off the shelf. They're very slow herbs and they're very patient herbs. And they're herbs that are going to work with your body traditionally over time. And that's where the word alterative came from. Because it alters, gradually changes, and slowly moves from one condition to another, right? So that's a good way to kind of, like we talked about adaptogen, right? How it helps the body adapt. The alternative helps the body alter its state. So here's another analogy, because I really do like to dumb it down for myself. So imagine you buy a property, right? For all our homestead friends out there, So you've bought this property and your garden's overgrown and your soil is terrible. There's weeds everywhere. You probably are tearing up your dandelions because you don't know yet. And what do? Do you walk outside and snap your fingers and everything's better in the afternoon and you just continue on with life? If you have that talent, please let me know. You can become a billionaire. So no, you slowly improve the soil and you pull the weeds and you add some compost and you water it consistently and you prune and you just pour yourself into this property. And what happens? Slowly, the state of the homestead alters and improves. So that's always a good way to traditionally view an alterative. Now, it's not this dramatic intervention. Again, it's gradual support and small changes that are going to add up over time. So let's circle back to blood cleanser, right? So we can kind of link everything together. But because this is where, to me, it kind of gets very interesting, but I kind of nerd out on this stuff anyway. When herbalists use that phrase, they weren't literally watching dirty blood become clean, right? We already established they didn't have the equipment to be able to dig into that stuff the way we do now. They weren't watching the toxins leave. So they were only using the language that was available to them at the time. And when the people improved after taking certain herbs, they often described the process as the people looked as though they had a cleansing or a purifying or correcting of the blood. And so today, many herbalists think about those observations, may have been involved in things like healthy digestion and liver function, lymphatic movement. So this is all the things they were seeing, but they just didn't have the knowledge to be able to describe it that way, right? Pathways were opening, inflammation was going away, and like people were genuinely getting better. But the herbalists just didn't have the mechanics to even break it down and explain what they were doing. They just noticed the outcome. You know, Ted was almost dead, and now Ted's back outside gardening. And honestly, it's quite fascinating to think about. And I think you're starting to see why a lot of herbalists were labeled as witches back then too, because when people didn't understand, they were scared of it. So let's look at a few herbs in that category. And so, of course, the most famous you're going to see everywhere is burdock root. Burdock root has been used traditionally for generations and often appears in formulas intended for that, that long-term wellness support. I actually enjoy burdock tea sometimes. Dandelions, right? Dandelions are going to be on the top of that list too. Please stop killing the dandelions and spraying them. They are actually a very good herb for this. And then you've got red clover. It's a beautiful plant too, with a long history of showing that, that blood cleansing type that we're talking about. And then, of course, cleavers. I already did the video on cleavers with that lymphatic support and getting things moving after the long winter. It's always amazing to me when the herbs come up because it's exactly when we need it. And another one that comes to mind is yellow dock. So if you start reading, these herbal texts, these herbs start appearing time and time again, right? Very different plants, different actions, yet herbalists often group them together, right, under this one terminology umbrella because of the role they seem to play over time. So they're not necessarily always fixing the same things, because you take one herb for one reason, one herb for another, but they were showing that gradually over time there was an improvement. So historically, these were used consistently over weeks or even months. They were even viewed, and again, in that gradual change. He is not being very helpful tonight. They were categorized, and they're absolutely in that long-term herbal category, right? So you could take these for a longer scale to see the change. And that, unfortunately, doesn't work for some people because we've been kind of programmed to, I want to be fixed tomorrow, and I need everything done by next week because I got a trip and I want to do that. But that's just not how these work. And so you have to change your mindset and understand that meaningful change is going to take some time, right? We don't start a diet and lose 30 pounds overnight. And honestly, I mean, that's true if we're talking about our gardening, our habits, our health, or life in general. If it's worth doing, it's going to take some time to accomplish it. So were herbalists really talking about blood cleansers? Well, yeah, in a way they were, but not necessarily in the modern way people use that language nowadays, right? They were using the language available, again, to describe the patterns they repeatedly observed in people, and certain herbs seem to support that gradual improvement, and alternatives just became that word. And so that's what we use because they, again, alter the state. And so once you really start to link this all together, again, we already did adaptogens and now these. So again, you're starting to see the differences between them, but they can still be lumped, even having those same characteristics and be the same herb. So if you only remember one thing from today's video, alteratives aren't traditionally viewed as quick fix herbs. They're herbs associated with slow, steady, long-term support. And sometimes that's the interesting part of it all. You go in to fix one thing and you end up fixing others. So I'd love to hear from you. Had you ever heard the term blood cleanser before? Did it mean what you thought it meant? Let me know in the comments below. Which herbal term do you think we're going to talk about next? Where do you think we're going with this, right? We've got a lot of them we can go down, but I really do think this is beneficial to kind of get that ground roots. So when I'm talking about, lemon balm's this or lavender's this, it all kind of makes that connection. So until next time, guys, stay rooted, stay curious, and keep growing in grace. And good night, friends.